So this is a very special night, a very holy night, a very sacred night. We celebrate the Lord's Last Supper together as the St. Thomas More Catholic community. This is the night that Jesus gives us the Eucharist, and we have our RCI candidates here. And one of the sacraments of initiation is the Eucharist, which you will all be receiving at the Easter Vigil. That is a way, along with baptism, some of you are already baptized, and confirmation and the Eucharist are the sacraments of initiation. And the Eucharist is such a central part of our Catholic faith. It's called the source and summit of Christian life. As we hear in today's second reading from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, Jesus says, "This is the new covenant in my blood." So it's establishing the new covenant. The first reading from Exodus reminds us that we're also celebrating tonight the Jewish Passover, where Moses led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. And similarly, Jesus, by his sacrifice on the cross, which we celebrate tomorrow, frees us from the slavery of sin. It's very, very significant, as I'm sure you know, that in John's Gospel, of the four Gospels, there's no recounting of the Last Supper per se. Well, there is in the Last Supper, but not the institution of the Eucharist. Instead of the institution of the Eucharist, that this is my body and this is my blood, which we see in the Synoptics and we see in St. Paul, he replaces that with the washing of the feet in the place of the institution of the Eucharist and the Synoptic Gospels. And that whole washing of the feet is highly, highly symbolic, as so many things in John's Gospel are. There's no parallel in extant ancient literature of anyone of higher status washing the feet of someone of lower status. So what Jesus does at the Last Supper, washing the feet of his disciples, is very revolutionary, very, very countercultural. It's that part of that divine reversal that we hear about so much in the Gospels. And Jesus does this fully aware of his divine status. In the Gospel, it's mentioned that he does this fully aware that the Father had put everything into his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So it wasn't like this a casual gesture. He was fully aware of his divine status when he chose to take the role of a servant. It was always the role of a servant or a slave to wash the feet of the guests. And in washing the disciples' feet, Jesus points towards his coming death on the cross as the supreme revelation of God is love. So you know, that's one of the themes in John's Gospel about God is love. And this is really showing this washing of the feet as a way of pointing to that, to the sacrifice on the cross, which we'll celebrate tomorrow, as a supreme revelation of God's love. The foot washing on the cross mutually illuminate each other as the supreme revelation of divine love expressed in service. So that's how Jesus reveals God as a God of love and a God of service. A God who humbles himself, becomes one of us, dies for us, and loves us and serves us in humble ways. It's really very dramatic, very beautiful, very powerful. Jesus' mission from the Father is to reveal God as love, self-sacrificing love. So God is not only love, but he's self-sacrificing love, as we see so dramatically on the cross and the Passion. And when he asks his disciples to do likewise, he is asking them and us as well to continue his mission from the Father to be the ongoing expression of God's love in and for the world. So he's asking us when he says, "Do this in memory of me," and wash each other's feet as I have washed your feet. He's asking us to continue his mission of love and service in the world. Jesus has chosen the disciples at the Last Supper to be the instruments through whom his revelation will continue after he has left us, after he's left this world and returned to the Father. And then the disciples and we will replicate, in our love for each other, will replicate the sacrificial love of Jesus that it embodies. So this is really what we're called to tonight. We're called to imitate the sacrificial love of Jesus as expressed in humble service of one another. And Jesus shows us how to do it. He demonstrates it. And again, it's something that we can take for granted, but what he did was really quite dramatic, that he, God, the creator of all, that he would humble himself to become one of us, and then that he would wash our feet as a servant or a slave would. That's unheard of. It's literally unheard of. And he does that. He shows us the way to humble service and asks us to replicate that in our lives to continue his mission on earth. And that's a big mission that we have. And of course, all this happens against the backdrop of evil, active and present in our world, as we see in the betrayal of Judas. So in all these passion narratives, we see evil present in the betrayal of the disciples of Peter, and especially in Judas. And when he leaves the Last Supper, it says, the gospel says, and it was night, it was dark. As both Father RJ and I have discussed in recent homilies, you don't have to look very hard to see the forces of evil and darkness in our world. And I just think with the Derek Chauvin trial going on at this time in Minneapolis, it just shines a spotlight that there is a lot of evil in the world. And I'm not going to sit here tonight and recount all the evils of the world, but I think that trial, and if you've watched any of the testimony or heard any of the testimony in the media, it's really kind of blood curdling. It's chilling. It moves our heart. One of the things that struck me was this little 6-year-old girl who had witnessed what happened. And they asked her, well, how did it make you feel? And she said, I felt sad and I felt mad. And out of the mouth of a 6-year-old, because she had seen something that was wrong. And yet, despite all the evil in the world, Jesus reveals God's love expressed in humble service in the midst of it all. So we have this evil in the world that's always with us, but God enters into that, in the midst of that, and Jesus reveals God as love, expressed in humble service, which again he calls us to. So that is how we are called, at this liturgy, we are called to counter the forces of evil and racism and bigotry and selfishness and greed. We're called to counter those destructive forces by embodying Christ's self-sacrificing love in humble service of one another. So you see the contrast there. The evil's there, but also Christ's love is there. And Christ's love, which he says, team, come on. Now you are the team. Now this has to continue in you. Come and do likewise. Wash one another's feet. You now carry on my mission in your humble service of one another by fighting racism, by fighting bigotry, by fighting injustice, by helping the poor, by helping immigrants. That is how he calls us to continue his mission here on earth and how he works through us. So maybe at this celebration of the Last Supper, to me it's a good reminder that whenever we celebrate Mass, and I think all of us, Mass can become routine, but whenever we celebrate Mass, we should always think of the washing of the feet. We should think of Jesus washing the disciples' feet, and think about when we celebrate Mass how we are called to humble service of one another. We are called to wash one another's feet. We are called to be the continuation of Christ's love and humble service in our world, to counter the forces of evil and to be Christ's presence in the world. Father, Son, Holy Spirit.